This presentation is about another element of considering your supporting materials, and that is making sure that your supporting materials are good ones. Review Chapter 7 for more information on this topic and for a discussion about avoiding plagiarism. If you have any questions at all about what you need to cite or not cite so that you can avoid a plagiarism problem, please don't hesitate to ask, but we'll also talk about that in class. When considering which supporting materials to use, you have to make sure that they're factual. There is a place for opinion in speeches when we don't have an answer on something quite yet, but various experts in some field have theories that you want to discuss. That's not the same kind of opinion as just someone's random Facebook post or blog that's supported by no facts and is just a person's point of view. Opinions are only valuable in speeches in certain contexts and when they're backed up by good reasons for those opinions. Be very careful not to communicate something that's merely an opinion as if it were a fact, and don't mistakenly take an opinion and assume it's a fact in your thinking. Remember that you're responsible for the arguments you make in your speeches, so make sure that your supporting materials are as factual as possible. You also have to think about reliability. Late-night talk shows often poke fun at talking heads on stations like MSNBC, Fox, and CNN, who regularly make statements that like, "Mark my words, candidate X will be the nominee," or "Candidate X will win the election." These comics will paste together case after case of one of these so-called experts saying something that ends up being not true at all. Go to the Angel folder for this week and watch the Daily Show excerpt that points out this tendency. So how reliable would you consider someone like that? You need to make sure that your sources are reliable and also as unbiased as possible, which helps communicate reliability to your audience. Supporting materials should also be well supported, which means three things. They're verifiable, comprehensive, and coming from more than one source. Verifiable means that you're using sources that your audiences can find with little trouble. When you cite your sources correctly in your speech, you're helping make sure your audience knows that you consider your sources verifiable. After all, you're giving them access to your source, so that helps them have trust that you're using a good source. Comprehensive supporting materials mean that you're bringing forth information that recognizes complexity and that you've done research on the whole of your topic, not just the easy part or not just the part you know you can find evidence to support. You need to make sure that your sources have also studied and considered the issues they're commenting on comprehensively. Finally, the best sources are giving you information that you can have verified by another source. In some cases, yes, you may come across an argument that's so new only one person is making it at this point. But that's a rare occurrence, and you should make sure that whatever you can bring to your audience in supporting material, that it needs to generally be recognized by the public or experts in some field as legitimate. In some cases, you need to make sure that your sources are current, and in some cases, you don't. If you're talking about the dangers of smoking cigarettes, we haven't learned too much new in the past few years, so being super current may not be as important. But if you're talking about new electronic cigarettes, then currency is important. And if you're talking about a new pandemic or going back to the late 80s and early 90s when AIDS had become a pandemic, getting the most current information available out to the public was crucial to saving lives. So when thinking about currency, you need to make the decision based on your topic. And if currency is important, you need to make sure that your sources are as current as possible. Now that we have the internet and don't have to wait months or years for information to come down to the public in books or magazines, there's no excuse for not having the most recent information available for your audience. You can certainly use opinions, testimony, and anecdotes to bolster your arguments, but you don't want to rely on those things completely to make your arguments. There's incredible room for error in these types of supporting materials, and just because something happens once or twice to one or two people doesn't mean that it's true for the whole population. So be careful when using these types of supporting materials, and try to only use them as additional support for ideas you've already supported in more substantial ways. It's sometimes hard for us to do, but we need to examine opposing viewpoints more often and more carefully. Today's media world makes it possible to surround ourselves in news and information that only supports what we already believe to be true, and that's a mistake. Being open-minded and willing to study opposing viewpoints and then change your perspective when confronted with new information that challenges what you thought was true is important. If for no other reason, the person that studies opposing viewpoints is far better armed to debate those ideas because she knows what the opposing viewpoint is, what arguments and what support they're relying on, and can therefore counter those things in her own speech, taking ammunition away from the opponent's position. Don't be afraid of new information. Welcome it. Would it surprise you to learn that the Non-Smoker Protection Committee was partly funded by R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company and that they backed a November 2006 ballot initiative called the Arizona Non-Smoker Protection Act that would have actually allowed smoking in all bars and in some restaurants statewide, overturn smoking bans, and restrict and prohibit cities from adopting strict smoking bans in the future? Would it surprise you to learn that the Cincinnati Medical News was an anti-abortion newspaper? Or that the Animal Welfare Council primarily represents rodeos, but also ranching, horse slaughter, and the circus industry? Does Project Protect sound like the name of a group that supports the logging industry and the continued logging of the forests in our country? The groups I've just listed are what we call front groups, and they're the reason you have to be very, very skeptical of groups with polite sounding names that seem nonpartisan. Check them out. Go to their websites and click the About page and learn who they really are. Front groups purposely create names that do the Orwellian work of communicating the opposite of what they're actually in favor of. So be sure that when you come across a group whose name you're not familiar with, you check out who they are through an internet search. Sourcewatch.org is a good place to check for this information. Remember that you're responsible for what you bring up to the lectern, so don't repeat the mistake of a former student whose anti-abortion argument was primarily based on facts from the Cincinnati Medical News, that anti-abortion group I mentioned earlier. She didn't intend on trying to trick the audience, but found information that agreed with her perspective and therefore uncritically added the information to her speech without any fact-checking. And she and her grade paid a dear price for that mistake. So make sure you don't make that mistake and check out any kinds of groups that you're not familiar with. Finally, be critical of internet sites. They can be front groups like the one we just talked about. They can also be really good looking internet sites but have no really good information on them. They can be very biased, and anyone can put anything up on the internet, so it's especially important that you double and triple check any information you take from a person or a group's webpage. Remember that if you have any questions about any of your sources, err on the side of caution and talk to me. We'll figure it out together.